Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we're here for another poetry discussion, a poetry discussion that will come to us from Emily Dickinson, and therefore it will be in two separate playlists on the channel. Number one, obviously, the poetry discussion playlist, but number two, the Emily Dickinson poetry discussion playlist, which is new, and I am still adding all of the older videos to it. But if you find yourself here by chance but not design, and you love literature, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more, because literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel. Poetry every Mondays. I am reading through No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai right now, and I do short stories as well as writer's quotes, things like that. But we are currently in the 70s of days in a row as far as uploading on the channel here. And if you want to help me out with what I'm doing, hitting the like button tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. So let's get into it. I Dwell in Possibility by Emily Dickinson, and the poem reads as such. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of the eye, and for an everlasting roof the gambrels of the sky, of visitors the fairest, for occupation this, the spreading wide of narrow hands to gather paradise. A short poem, a brief poem. Um, Possibly an impenetrable poem if you're not willing to do some work on the dashes. Someone that I love almost as much as Emily Dickinson is Chris Cornell, singer of Soundgarden. And there is a song from Soundgarden called The Day I Tried to Live. And it contains a quote as such. Words you say never seem to live up to the ones inside your head. The lives we make never seem to get us anywhere but dead. I am reminded of this quote by this poem because it seems to me that a lot of what Emily Dickinson is doing here is building with the spreading the spreading wide of narrow hands to gather paradise. It seems to me that a lot of what Emily Dickinson is doing here is creating a world where one does not exist, creating a world of the imagination. Possibility is what she says. I dwell in possibility. I live in what is possible. And that on the surface certainly sounds very inspirational to an extent. But if you are living in the possible, it means that you do not exist in the now. It means that you're not here. You're not here now. You are not present. There's a term in pedagogy. For a couple years, when I went off to get my degree, I was studying to be a high school teacher, and realized probably it's not for me. Probably I'm not that. There is a term called withitness. WITH-ITNESS. With itness. Sometimes it's just one word. Sometimes there are two dashes. With dash it dash ness. The fact that there are three variations of this word is in fact pretty self-defeating, and I'm going to tell you why. What it means is that, oh, hey, man, you're hip, you're cool, you're totes down with the lingo. Now, I never really understood why teachers should have quote unquote with itness. Never made sense to me. I think um, if you are a high school teacher, your students should see you as stodgy to some extent. I think that makes sense. But whatever. Maybe neither here nor, but it is here nor there for this, here and there perhaps for this discussion, because while and whereas I think that teachers should be seen as stodgy and maybe distant to their students, there is something to be said for with itness in life, isn't there? There is something to be said for presentness. There is something to be said for being here in the moment. And there's a great sacrifice to not being here in the moment. There's a great sacrifice for Emily Dickinson, um, dwelling in possibility. Maybe, maybe she was all right with that. And look, to be fair, I'm not speaking technically about Emily Dickinson. I'm speaking about the speaker of this poem. But anytime we get into speaking about a poem, there is a person behind it. And no, I don't necessarily think that a writer and author has to be understood to understand the work. I don't think there is any one definition of the work. But we do know that Emily Dickinson did practice what she preached here. We do know that there is at least a modicum of the real life Emily Dickinson present in these lines. Emily Dickinson did dwell in possibility. Emily Dickinson did forsake, perhaps, the greater portion of her life to that possibility, which she states right in the poem is a fairer house than prose. Now, there is some ambiguity to that line. What does it mean, a fairer house than prose? Is fairness here referring to the complexion or the um, rough nature or lack of rough nature to the house of prose? Or is it speaking about actually right and wrong fairness? I am inclined to believe that this is in reference to right and wrong fairness, not mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all. I'm not speaking about, I don't think this is speaking about that type of fairness. I think that type of fairness is referenced later in Of Visitors, the Fairest. So we have our speaker forsaking the house of prose for possibility. Sort of saying that what is possible is more fair than what is. Emily Dickinson had a handful, and it's often phrased just like this, a handful of poems published in her life. None of the well, none in my estimation, none of her greater poems, but some of her poems published in her life. Now, let me offer the caveat that the Immeret, that I don't remember off the top of my head which of these poems are published. So if by some quake of imagination I forgot the fact that I Died for Beauty was published in Emily Dickinson's lifetime, I apologize. I don't believe that to be the case. Is this this poem, you can Google I Dwell in Possibility. Guess what you're going to get? You're going to get a host of websites on which this poem is published, references to this poem, papers which have been written about this poem, people whose dissertations were about this poem, personal reflections on blogs and vlogs that cite this poem, that uh, quote this poem. There will be no shortage of references to this poem 200 years after it was written. How many of the other poems published during this time, 200-ish years, how many other poems published during this time will have that brigade of internet presence? Not many. Very few. Is that what Emily Dickinson is telling us here? Or is it the opposite, and the fairest later is in reference to good and bad, to moral observations, but the fairer house than prose is talking about the fact that possibility is less sturdy than prose. But I don't think so. Is there so we all have an existence. We have one existence. By lack of religion, by most religions alive today, we have but one existence. We have but one life. One earthly life. By most religions. How much of it would you sacrifice for possibility? How much should you sacrifice for possibility? There is, there's a book by Jordan Peterson called The 12 Rules for Life. 12, I believe it's 12 Rules for Life off the top of my head. One of the rules in it is give me 1 second. Treat yourself as if you were someone you were tasked to take care of, something like that. So if we were to follow that rule, how much of life would you be willing to sit back and watch someone who loved you, someone who you loved, sacrifice? If your mother was a daydreamer, your sibling lived on cloud 9, but cloud 9 was of imagination. How much of their life would you be willing to let them toil away at things which you deem unlikely, but possible? Having answered that, can you say the same for yourself? Can you say the same thing for you? Can you say 2 hours a day towards goals that you're probably not going to meet? 2 hours a day towards some possibility of escaping the rat race that's probably not real. Some 2 hours per day in order to create. You're here nearly 14 minutes into a literature video. Probably you're the creative type. Probably you're a reader. How much of your reading is wasteful? Abraham Lincoln, very literary individual, loved reading. At the time, it was said that this was a fault of his character. You should be out chopping wood. And then he did that and became really good at it. Was legendary at chopping wood. Yeah. But in our sort of timeline, contemporarily, literature, reading, is sort of pointed to say, oh yes, I'm smarter than everyone else. Stiff upper lip, Hasn't always been the case. It used to be that, well, in Lincoln's time, there was a lot more stuff to do than sitting around reading. The only book you really needed was the Bible. That's how it was. That's what they said. All of your other time should go to curating food, fixing up your clothes, things like that. In today's world, how much of your reading existence is time dwelled in possibility? And is that wasted? And would those people, in the same way that readers prefer the company of readers, perhaps. People who enjoy music enjoy the company of people who enjoy music. Film lovers gather together. Even furries, some say, have friends. How much of it is wasted? How much of it is a waste? And is that okay? This life of possibility. Possibility, but not actuality. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you enjoy what I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out here on the channel. It tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more, because literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel, and I hope to have you back for the next one.